Just waiting for the stream to start. All right. Good morning, friends. Welcome to session 7. We read up to leading thoughts 138, was it? And I'm happy to 136, I should say. Happy to offer a little summary here. So Steiner speaking to the suffering of Michael at the beginning of this next section. Michael's suffering over the course that human evolution was taking just before um, Michael was able to more fully penetrate uh, the earthly sphere and enter into um, the human soul to aid us in evolution. Michael was having to sort of watch from afar prior to the last third of the 19th century before he could really reach us. Steiner had spoken last time about the role that the Rosicrucians were playing um, quietly, unassumingly, to maintain some kind of connection to Michael. But it wasn't until the last third of the 19th century that Michael becomes accessible to humanity more broadly. During this phase of the consciousness soul, as we know, the cosmic intellect was becoming human, it was being humanized, and human beings began to look upon the natural world as something separate from themselves. We pictured it externally as a kind of um, machine, and in the process of picturing nature outside of ourselves, we lost the picture of ourselves. We began to fail to understand what we are as human beings. Steiner reminds us of the history of the cosmos, which we studied in occult science, moving through these various planetary epochs, and that our own human constitution, our own human composition has this history enfolded within it. And Steiner says that we contain these physical and etheric elements from the beginnings of time and space, from the Saturn and Sun epochs, and that in these elements from the beginning were still composed of living spirit, but we also contain a later physical and etheric element that evolved in a recapitulated form during the moon and the earth epochs. And in these reconstituted physical and etheric bodies formed during the moon and the earth epochs, the work of spirit is behind them, but is not itself living in them. And Steiner says it's only when Christ enters into the etheric body during our present Earth epoch of evolution that these bodies are re-enlivened. We also received these new gifts from the moon and the Earth epochs, the astral body and the ego, and it is in these domains that Michael can now be active. So during this age of the consciousness soul, we've learned so much about the physical world, but again, we've entirely neglected the deeper aspects of our human nature. We've ignored the astral and the spiritual realities that underlie the physical world, and so we've become a mystery to ourselves. Steiner talks about this attempt to recover our humanness during the Renaissance, this Renaissance humanism, but he thinks that this is a kind of backwards reaching um, attempt to recover what's been lost in the past, and that this is just a symptom of our alienation from ourselves. And he points to works of literature like Goethe's Faust that describe this longing that the modern human being has. That we're in a situation now where we either have to numb our soul to find some way of ignoring this longing for self-knowledge, or we have to pursue self-knowledge as the essential meaning of our entire lives. There's no in between here. But this Renaissance form of humanism, um, Steiner seems to be reading as a striving in the wrong direction. He signals that it's like, in part, Michael trying to break through But it's a reaching back to recover the intellectual soul's glory and not dealing with the necessities of the consciousness soul. Um, and so Michael, in this Renaissance impulse um, to recover a sense of the intellectual soul, uh, this is pointing us too much to the past. We need to focus not on classical culture, but on dealing with a new way of relating to the natural world and relating to ourselves that can't simply be a backward movement, but this um, recovery of some sense of classical culture and the glory of the intellectual soul. Steiner says it allowed Michael to keep the dragon underfoot, but again, only by renewing the best of the intellectual soul. And it's during this period, Steiner says, we can behold Michael filled with anxiety um, about the course of human evolution. It's as though the dragon was, Ahriman was wrapping his coils around us um, as we increasingly tried to come up with some picture of ourselves as human beings based only on physical laws, just wrought from the laws that determine the material world around us, as if we were just a product of some mechanistic process of natural selection, that the human being is just emergent out of this mechanistic process. Um, and what anthroposophy is trying to point out to us is that the human being does not emerge out of an evolutionary process. Rather, the human being is, from the beginning, the agent of the evolutionary process. It is the human being that is evolving all along the way. So we are intrinsic to the process of evolution, not a product at the end of evolution. But during this consciousness soul era, we've come to view ourselves just as the product of a process that's not um, spiritual, that's not human, that's just mechanical. And we're this image of the natural world and ourselves as kinds of machines is a kind of illusion created by Ahriman that distracts us from the light of the of Christ that would otherwise be apparent to us, shining in our soul. Steiner speaks about Goethe and Schiller, their ideal of the human being. He quotes Schiller saying, the human being bears the universe within himself and realizes it in social intercourse with other human beings. Um, he points out, though, that Schiller and Goethe were very often looking again to the past, to classical Greek culture, for indications that were still valuable, but there was this other impulse in Goethe towards Spinoza, and Steiner feels that Spinoza has this more modern attitude and is an exemplar of the consciousness soul. And so Goethe was able to balance his backward-looking appreciation for the intellectual soul and the glories of Greek culture with this more modern Spinozistic sense of the consciousness soul. And we really need to struggle with this consciousness soul um, epoch and with the dragon of materialism that it foists upon us. Because if we don't have that confrontation with materialism, then our recovery of cosmic intellect um, would deliver us over to Lucifer, right? So we have to have the restrictions of the consciousness soul to avoid a Luciferic temptation as we recover the cosmic intellect. Steiner still describes Michael's mission at this point as a kind of cosmic tragedy and describes how, Michael is in the sunlight and the radiance of dawn in the starlight, but these rays of light from Michael become more like tears of sorrow as Michael watches the human being lose as we lose our ability to imaginally perceive the spiritual life of nature. And so there's something quite sorrowful in Michael's relationship to us, which perhaps is beginning to shift, but anxiety and sorrow is how Steiner's describing this archangel in relation to humanity. Um,
Could we slow down for just a
Steiner
second?
talks about how proud modern human beings are of this new mechanistic outlook. um, which allows us to feel certain that we feel as though we can know for sure we're not being deceived because um, we're no longer imagining that there's any thought behind nature, that there's purposeful thought going into its creation. Instead, we see thought as coming after nature, as it were, in our own reflection upon it, right? And so all thought, all purpose gets sequestered within the human, but we can't even see ourselves as human beings. Um, Meanwhile, just above the earth, uh, Michael is doing battle with Armon and Lucifer on our behalf, according to Steiner. An interesting comment at the end um, of this long section before Leading Thought 134, Steiner says, of course, all this applies only to the spiritual life of Europe and America. And what's going on in Asia is different. Um, I thought that was an interesting comment. Mm,
Matt, sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me? There's some noise interference.
so I'll stop there with my comments and welcome contributions from others. Lisa, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm
Please
sorry.
chime in.
Can you hear me okay?
I'm not hearing you though.
Oh,
Might need to fiddle with
is
your
that
mic.
better?
I can hear Lisa,
I can
so
Sorry.
hear
maybe
too.
it's on your end, Matt.
Yeah, Matt, we're having some noise interference from an unmuted phone line.
Oh, sorry. I can hear you. It was my,
Okay, so
it was,
we've been having some interference with sound on our end.
oh no.
Yeah, for like maybe the last 3 minutes, but I needed to slow down a little anyway because I have a question in a sense. So I'm very connected with children. And I just need to slow down a little bit because I've been away from my land recently and was ill. And I'm back now and really realizing how been so into technology and disconnected from the land and nature here. Um, and I am nature. But there's this term that's coming to me lately in the circles where I've got some mutual learning going on. In a sense, I have no idea what it means, but I think you do, techno-feudalism. So like in my sense, this need, and since I play with children, this need to return to seasonality and belonging at a ridiculously basic level that I feel we are disconnected from, and we can talk about that another time. But if we slow down to think from a child's view of the imaginal realm of no ceiling in terms of the judgmented mind or the rational thought, can you just go back over the last 4 minutes maybe of what you were speaking to? Because that's where I started to wonder. I also saw Rosemary's eyes looking up, and I have a penny for her thoughts too.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So sorry for that. The noise from whoever's phone that is. I wasn't didn't have my audio correctly adjusted so that I didn't know that was happening. Um,
It's okay though, because I was so excited with what you were saying that my mind stopped working anyway because I wanted to savor it. So I'd
mm,
love to review a little bit.
yeah. Well, I think the important aspect of what I was sharing is Michael's suffering and anxiety and sorrow in relation to the course that um, human evolution has been taking. I think, as I understand it, Michael maybe feels less powerless after the last third of the 19th century, in that human beings can welcome in the aid of Michael now in a way that they couldn't before. Um, but that so much has been occluded as a result of the powerful rise of materialism and technology. I mean, you mentioned this techno-feudalist reality that I think is being foisted upon us, where um, there is, in a sense, a breakdown of some of the modern political structures um, and a tremendous hoarding of wealth that's leading to a return of what amount to, you know, royalty and princes and kings who will, I think, begin to replace governments as those who promise to maintain peace and order, and that those who can afford to pay these you know billionaires as their feudal lords will gain protection and resources from them. And so I think it's one future path that our society might head down in the near future. Not that the nation state has been serving us very well, but the power of the nation state certainly seems to be waning. And
Yeah. Well,
from
none
an
of it sounds very good for children. So when you talk about
uh,
the dragons, at some point I'd love to think more about like the dragons that, children are free to imagine and dream, and the stories and the creativity of the human being on Earth. But I know that's for another time. But I glimpsed some of those folks back east at Christmas time that you're talking about.
mm, yeah, we'll see what others are thinking. Um, James, your hand's next.
I was thinking like almost like the patron saint of this consciousness, an intellectual consciousness, maybe was Nietzsche, because I think what Steiner was talking about him, he looked back to like the mystery plays of the Greeks and saw the beauty and everything working in that, and he couldn't find it in his society. Maybe he was an old soul that was born in the end of his period or the beginning of a wrong period, but he was a soul that's outside of his period. And he longed for this and he couldn't see it. And maybe that what he's brought about is like he was like a scorned lover looking over his poems and everything that ever had about humanity he wanted to bring. And it wasn't there and he was longing for it. Maybe he just checked out. Maybe his ego just checked out. And from there, these words, this philosophy, his soul started to spread in other people's souls because they were feeling the same thing. He just recognized it probably first, but I think everybody has these angst and feelings and like where we get what, and I think he was the one that was saying it, and then we're going through a whole century later, and the nihilism and the meaning of crisis. And I came upon something that uh, I think it was talking. I think Steiner was talking about Novalis, who said basically the fairy tale is like food for the soul, with the imagination. And then even with the children. I mean, I always loved fairy tales when I was growing up, and I love that stuff that brings that imagination because it takes you outside of the world that you're in, basically this materialistic world. But I like with this is fairy tale, the hyacinth and rosebud and stuff like that lets you bring that spiritual soul. And I think we got to be more poetic and when our with our philosophy and learning. And I think that these people like Goethe, Novalis, they were showing us like there's like a channel that's on YouTube, whatever. I like to listen to this girl talk, and she talks about retrocausalities in these lyrics and the everyday lyrics you hear from music. But like you said, there's like a higher meaning to that. There's if you read in between the lines, there's a higher meaning, and it doesn't have to be about a love for a person on right now that somebody. But it seems like some of these words of this music is higher. So I think there might be by doing that we have to maybe look into the past at these myths and everything. Maybe there is a higher language to it for us that we can get to. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that contribution, James. I agree. Karsten, please.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks for the introduction. I was very inspired by this chapter called The Mystery of the Logos. which leads up to leading thoughts 137 to 139, and I don't think you touched upon it in your presentation. But one question that has come up for me in these meetings we have here is that when we talk about these figures, Lucifer, Michael, Ahriman, sometimes Stein is talking about temptations, the temptation of Lucifer, of Ahriman, but also in some places, and I think in particular in this chapter, The Mystery of the Logos, he's talking about a natural process that is occurring in the spiritual. You could call it a natural process, but he's making a distinction between natural processes and spiritual processes. But it's something like a natural spiritual process, that in nature we have these cycles, the annual cycle, and he's talking about this myth of Persephone disappearing during the winter, kind of dramatizing the annual cycle of the plants, how they live up and die away. But then you have this greater cycle, which man is part of, and where the mystery of Golgotha that's you could say, the dark night of this cycle. Maybe I'm not sure if I get that right, if that's what Steiner means, but at least the mystery of Golgotha, it's part of this larger cycle that mankind is a part of. And I've been thinking, I think you brought it up last time, Matt, how do we recognize these temptations in our everyday life, the Luciferian or the Ahrimanic? And when is what is happening just, say, a natural process? So I think in this disconnection from spirit, there's something, in a sense, natural that is happening, a part of a cosmic cycle that goes on everywhere, but it's on so much a larger scale that we cannot kind of get hold of the whole cycle. And so I've been thinking about, what you talked about last time, Matt, was these conversions that we suddenly see, people converting to Christianity. And we can ask ourselves the question, what is it? Is it a Luciferian temptation, going back to something that is kind of the past? And I think one thing we can see is that when you look at dogmatic Christianity, it's based on what you could call a sacrificial interpretation of the Bible story of the Passion. That is, Jesus is being sacrificed for the sake of our sins. That's what I call, and I have this phrase, sacrificial interpretation, I have from René Girard, which some of you may know, who's one of his most famous books is called Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World, where he talks about how primitive culture, and almost all human culture, is primitive in the sense that it's based on a scapegoat mechanism. And you can see that in church, that, I mean, in the Passion, there's a process. So you have all that is leading up to the crucifixion. Then you have the torture. Then you have the crucifixion. Then you have Jesus being taken down, and then later on you have the resurrection. And what you see, in my view, in these more dogmatic forms of Christianity, is that they've never taken Jesus down from the cross. He's still hanging there. But you also see other interesting interpretations. So, for example, you have Slavoj Žižek, which has his materialistic Christianity, and he's seeing this whole story as God incarnating into the Son, the Christ and then dying on the cross. So what he's understanding from this process is the death of God. And actually, I think he has a deeper understanding of what is happening there than that which you see in dogmatic Christianity, in which the Christ is still hanging there on the cross. And I remember when I had my kind of spiritual awakening back in the day, and in the start, I didn't know of any kind of spiritual teachings. And I started reading the Bible, and I had never done that before, but I just started reading the Bible and trying to understand what it was all about. And when I read the Passion several times, there was this question that occurred to me. What happened to the Christ when he was on this cross? Did he die? That was the question that came into my mind. And eventually I came to the conclusion, yes, of course, he was a human being. So he died and he was buried. And that was that. And I kind of just settled with that explanation and didn't think about it anymore for a while. And I didn't believe in the resurrection. But then a strange thing happened. After some days, suddenly for my inner vision, I suddenly saw this image of the Christ. And it was like one of these icons from the Eastern Church. That was kind of you could say, the aesthetics of the figure. But it was alive, and there was kind of this warmth coming towards me. And I suddenly realized, yeah, the Christ, he died, but he's still here with us, but he's in the spiritual world, so to speak. So seen from the spiritual point of view, the Christ is still here and he's present with us. As he also says in the Bible that he will be with us all days until the end. And so you have this whole cycle, which in a sense is about a certain image of the God dying, and it's supposed to die. And in that process, we kind of lose the old connection we had with the divine. And then you have this resurrection, which is actually about the Christ in us, the hope of glory, as St. Paul put it. So I think when we have to judge whether if we should judge or kind of make some kind of judgment, when is it Luciferian temptation having this kind of conversion? I think we have to look at the kind of interpretation that people have of the Bible story and of the Passion and the mystery of Golgotha.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very rich weaving of thoughts there, Karsten. I have only scratched the surface of Rene Girard's work. I watched a documentary on his work a few days ago, actually. I haven't read Things Hidden, his book yet. I know he has a few books before that, but it seems like he had a legitimate, or I should say authentic conversion experience and had some kind of encounter with the Christ. And then as a literary theorist, he had been developing an understanding of this, what he calls mimetic desire and the scapegoating mechanism and everything. And his experience of Christ somehow illuminated this account he was offering of human sociology and anthropology and this scapegoating dynamic. And he realized the Christ event was different in some way, because everyone knew that the scapegoat wasn't actually guilty, but was in fact innocent. And I think not knowing the full depth of Girard's faith, and I don't want to put this on him, but it seems like many who find his work compelling find it compelling because it offers a kind of sociological explanation of the Christ event, that recognizes the profound importance of what occurred then as but more as a psychosocial event rather than something spiritual. And so you have people like a lot of these tech billionaires like Peter Thiel are really into Girard. I don't think Peter Thiel thinks of himself as a Christian, but from a sociological point of view, he recognizes the scapegoat complex and mimetic desire and the importance of what Girard is pointing out. And so that's a very interesting phenomenon. I see both Luciferic and Armonic elements in how this how Girard's theory is taken up into the broader culture. And then there's Zizek and his account of, you know, as he tells the story, Jesus becomes an atheist on the cross and cries out, "Why have you forsaken me?" to his father. And um, then the death of Jesus is the death of God, and for Zizek, all that's left is the community. And so he interprets the Holy Spirit as just the communist sense of solidarity among human beings who no longer need God. Um, Very interesting recovery of something from this Christ event that's, again, not spiritual, really, but powerful in a psychological and a sociological way. What's going on there? Is that an harmonic deception, or is this a little bit of the Christ impulse bleeding into the dominant culture? Um, I'm curious, not sure. Yeah. Jeff, please. Jeff K.
Oh, good morning.
Morning.
Carson, I'm going to weave through your thoughts, some of your thoughts that you're presenting. I also just finished about an hour ago, going up through number 139 in the readings, and that's very fresh in my mind, and it's had a humongous impact on me this morning. And I don't know if I can say anything coherent, but I'm going to try right now. It's kind of improv theater right here, but. So one of the points you dropped in, Karsten, on the seasonality, this descent of Persephone in the winter and all these kinds of things. I guess I'll even take a half step back to begin with. Like in this section and many of the sections we've been reading in this book is kind of like a multifaceted presentation of Mikhail. It's, ultimately we're finding out about our relationship to the Christ events and the mystery of Golgotha and all of this. That's kind of a central topic in this book and in Steiner. It's something I've only in recent years really come to appreciate what Steiner's even talking about. But yeah, more on Mikhail. He's giving us all these multiple presentations, in each lecture series that we read here. It's a very Goethean presentation, right? You don't just do one kind of mechanical experiment and call that science, but you look at things from multiple perspectives. So anyways, that's a little bit of the background for this whole book for me. But yeah, coming more specifically, back to Persephone and the seasons, this kind of also, Carson, what you mentioned, the great temptations of Ahriman and Lucifer. Again, he presents that from multiple perspectives, as we go through these lectures. And what's really coming through to me, especially in this particular lecture up to 139, the temptations that we have, particularly now in the spiritual soul phase, is the way he puts it is that at the beginning, the onset of the spiritual soul was the beginning function is the function of light, illumination. But the danger, the temptation, is where we don't marry that with its counterpart, which is the warmth of spiritual love, the warmth of Christ's love and Mikhail's guidance and things like that. And the danger there, it's Ahrimanic and Luciferic, but the outcome of that danger could be that we don't actually progress into the spiritual soul. We stay in kind of a rigidified intellectual soul. A lot of what he was talking about, and you brought up Carson with and Matt too in your summary. Going back to certain previous phases of Greek culture. All these kinds of layers he puts in here. But yeah, this bigger picture of what the real danger we're fighting is this that we don't find ourselves properly grounded in the spiritual soul. So anyway, that's a big context and a big background. And as they say, he's come at this from many angles. It's really starting to crystallize for me, as we get up to this 139. And I guess what I want to kind of um, tie things up with, at least from my perspective, this is super concrete for me. What I read this morning, again about this descent of Persephone and the seasons as we experience nature in a certain way. We kind of experience um, this potentially deadened material world, deadened nature. But the seasons and I'll kind of finish that thought. Sorry, I'm a little scattered here, but so yeah, we have this danger of this deadened material view of nature. We experience the seasons, we experience outer nature, this fall of Persephone. But what in a sense we're supposed to go down in that direction, but what we're supposed to do, and this is what he's talking about in up to 139, is the meaning of this, the Christmas time and the Christmas festivities is ultimately about this, being able to bring this warmth of the Christ love to marry the cool light of intellectuality. They need each other. And so I'm sorry, I'm going to finish my thought here, but the concrete thing I want to bring in here, this has particular meaning to me. I hope I can explain this properly. But this whole idea of the seasons of nature and our human relationship to them, and Persephone and all these things he talks about, is a very medical concept. I live in this, that this is my world, that I'll be as brief as possible. This is like a whole thesis thought that kind of is blossoming in me this morning. But the idea of the seasons, when we come to Dr. Hahnemann and his understanding of disease and medicine and what is humanity really suffering? He Hahnemann preceded Steiner, but he was kind of a forerunner to lay the ground so that we can actually do something concrete with what Steiner is giving us here. The true deep suffering of humanity is what Hahnemann came to discover very profoundly, what he called chronic miasms. Very briefly, these are these great age-old genetic forms of diseases that come down the whole human family tree. Things like tuberculosis, things like syphilis, these are words we all know. And the great suffering that humanity this is our darkness, our dark night of the soul, this descent of Persephone. We get lost medically, health-wise, in these diseases. And I'll leave it with this. This is, I think, easy for anyone in this group to understand, even without being in my world. Is this disease of syphilis I just mentioned to, one of its manifestations is something we all know as alcoholism. So anyone who's come close to that problem of alcoholism, in yourself, in your family, in your broader community, even as we all know this culturally, the great dark battle with alcoholism is just one facet of our great battle with syphilis, which is again is one of the part of this even greater battle I'm talking about of this descent of Persephone into the seasons, these seasonal miasms, these genetic inheritances that Hahnemann identified for humanity. They follow a seasonal pattern. So we're in the northern hemisphere. I know we have people from all over the world here. In the northern hemisphere, we're in the winter tuberculosis season, but in the southern hemisphere, we are, humanity is kind of most susceptible to feeling the effects of that syphilis summer miasm. So anyway, I'm sort of being a little bit rambling here, but I'm trying to draw together some threads and say, yeah, there's something very concrete that I know about, and now Steiner's helping me to understand this in a much bigger picture and the true meaning of what the true redemption of Christ is for us, and what it is we're actually being rescued from. So I'm sorry if being a little bit scattered here, and I hope I gave something of meaning for anyone listening to me.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I mean, this emphasis on the seasonal cycles reminds me of just, I think it was the last session of readings when Steiner was hinting at the way that the Protestant Reformation sort of broke the Catholic ritual life and liturgy, and so the sense of the meaning of the seasonal round and our connection as human beings to that was shattered as the consciousness soul came into being and sort of forced us inward and severed us from those rhythms, and that the archangels are part of a cycle, whereas this Christ event is a one-time deal, and so quite different. But at this particular moment in history, Michael and Christ are in cahoots, and Michael has an important role to play in bringing warmth back into our thinking. And but it seems like the confrontation with nihilism that the consciousness soul requires of us is such an important um, kind of purgatory or a purification, as it were, and that we can't like the Luciferic temptation to go back is an attempt to avoid that confrontation with nothingness, with meaninglessness, and we need a post nihilistic consciousness. In other words, we have to go through it and come out the other side and win back a connection to the spirit through our own freedom, not from some gift from the cosmos. And that constitutes a kind of sickness, you know. Like we've got a fever now, and we've got to see it through and be transformed on the other side of that. Um, Jeff, please.
Come on, Matt. We can just use some pharmaceuticals, get rid of that fever. We just treat the symptoms, man. That's how we roll. Um, yeah, we're sort of suffering averse, aren't we? I don't know what the hell I'm going to say because this is a swirling bit of stuff, but I think maybe if I focus in on this last number 139, where he makes the differentiation between the quick repetitions of nature through seasons. And if everything is symptomatic of everything else, then everything is a repetition or an iteration of everything else in a certain sense. And he's laying out this bifurcation that is necessary and really caused, you could say, by the Christ event. Like we think of the Christ as the Redeemer, but the Christ is also ripping the temple apart right now. And we're living in the mystery of Golgotha. That wasn't something that happened 2,000 years ago. And that's part of, I would say, the Michaelic suffering that somebody brought in Nietzsche. And clearly Nietzsche was a sufferer in a Michaelic sense. It's a reason why Steiner referred to him as a martyr for freedom. And I don't know. I don't think that we have the intellect to really grasp what it is that's going on here. And I'm with I forget your name, but going down, I almost need to take this paragraph by paragraph and then number by number, and we'll do that. And I'm going to propose a group that actually reads one paragraph and talks about it and see what happens, and then reads another paragraph and see what happens. Because I think the first paragraph could cover a whole session here, or the last numbered note could cover a whole session. But so I'm going to try to kind of, in the spirit of what Jeff was saying, and in the spirit of this whole section, or this whole work, that the only way to approach the Christ is through art, is through improvisation, is through creation, is to become part of the creation story, if you will. And this is why Nietzsche was so powerful, right? Because he was an artist in concepts, as Steiner says. The only philosophers worth their salt. He didn't say that, but that's what I'm saying. Worth their salt are artists in concepts. And so he makes a distinction here, and I want to go back to this bifurcation. He talks about what I take as the highest spiritual realms working into matter through the rhythms of the season, the fourfold rhythms of the season. And that is there. It's inherent to the earth, one might say imminent to the earth. And then on the other side, he describes the Christ as an ensouling process. And then he bifurcates that and says, Christ is ensouling nature, that the Christ brings ensoulment into nature, which is the life processes. And then on the other side of that, he says, Christ is also ensouling humanity, and he uses the term, two terms, the divine and the eternal, something like that, right? What are the terms? So, anybody? Let me look at it. It's worth looking at. Beginning and eternity. So nature is experiencing a rhythmic spiritualization. Nature, as the earth, I'm sorry, is experiencing this rhythmic, through the seasons, spiritualization. The rest of nature, which sort of hovers above the earth in a certain sense, plants are very atmospheric. Elsewhere, he describes animals as being really cosmic beings. That realm is experiencing an ensoulment that brings the generative genesis or beginning energy or reality to the table, and that of eternity. And then he says, with human beings, this ensouling process with the logos and the beginning brings well, with the logos brings the beginning, the generative and the eternal. And so I guess that I'm left with a question. There are three things going on. There's the spiritualization of matter through rhythmic processes. There's this ensoulment of nature, generally speaking. What the hell does that mean? And then there's the ensoulment of the human being with logos in relationship to that which is generative and that which is eternal. So all I experience there is the mystery of Golgotha, that those three things are meant to weave together, and they are themselves the reiteration of the Trinitarian all over the place. So I think that's the best I can do. I don't know what that's going to sound like in the end.
Yeah. No, I'm surfing the swirl with you, Jeff. Um, hmm. Let's keep going here. Let's see what I'm not sure 970 area code. If you want to chime in.
Hey, this is Doug.
Oh, hey, Doug.
I'm in an area with a poor connection, so I got dropped and I dialed in. Let's see here. That perspective of Christ becoming an atheist on the cross is not one I had considered before. As going into my swirling gist of things of a mind, I do have a couple of other interpretations that may go to this Christ that is still with us. First, retrocausality was mentioned, and there is a physics interpretation that could explain it, and I think this would be consistent with Whitehead as well, and David Bohm, that we're living in a cyclic universe from black hole to Big Bang again and again and again. Maybe that cycle is in the same space, a revised definition of space as we are, and that it is interacting with this world. And that things happen, that could be the source of retrocausality. On interpretations, One that I like very much is that Christ was influenced by Eastern religions. And so it was 30 Years in the East is a book that explores that. I'm not sure that's necessarily how it may have happened. But personally, I think an interpretation of the New Testament, the pre-Roman Christianity, is a revision of the Old Testament based on Eastern ideals. I think that can hold, more or less, assuming for the vagaries of translation and history and whatnot. It is that influence on the Old Testament is what Christianity is. Another perspective that I think is a bit harsher is that Roman Christianity is about crucifying the public by the elites, as a matter of law, matter of Judeo-Roman law, and so the Palestinians are being crucified. The young American supporters of Palestine, most of whom are very definitely not anti-Semitic, even though they are being portrayed as such, and many of whom are also Bernie Sanders supporters, are themselves being crucified as well. And that all of Roman Christianity is a complete lie. And we have devils, I think, not in the billionaire class so much as in the law itself. And that's what they are paid to do. I'm seeing places where right now the lawyers are trying to take over. I live in on disability in a rich community. They took the federal money for the housing, so they had to let me in when there were vacancies back 10 years ago. I see it there. And the other prominent example that comes to my mind is Brad Smith of Microsoft. And it's like the umpires in the baseball game are declaring themselves the winners and taking the salaries and et cetera, whatnot. And that's happened. I've seen that happen in a couple other places as well. So that's that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Just a quick word on what you were talking about Roman Christianity, Roman Catholicism, and I was speaking to a man yesterday who shared his conversion experience, wasn't raised Catholic, but converted about 10 years ago. And he worked with Wolfgang Smith, some of you may have heard of, he recently passed away. He was a mathematician and a physicist and a philosopher, more or less a traditionalist, but Catholic as well. And he spoke about, despite his allegiance to the church, he felt like it was in its entombed phase. If we were to look at different ages of the church corresponding with three phases of Christ's life, death, and resurrection, that the church is currently entombed, but that Wolfgang would often speak of the Church of the Resurrection, which was an anticipated sort of third culminating phase of the church's life. And, I always think of Steiner's statement that Christianity is only just beginning to have its effect on humanity, and the church has been around for, many centuries and may continue to evolve, but other institutions or even non-institutional forms of Christianity may rise. I want to make sure that Brian has a chance to chime in because we haven't heard from him yet, and we'll go back to you, Karsten.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I just wanted to add something real quick, kind of related to what Carson was saying when he said that when he had the experience of Christ, in whatever context he was mentioning for his personal thing, and then sort of what other people were talking about as well. But yeah, a lot of times, so Angelus Silesius had a quote that is, the cross of Golgotha cannot redeem you from evil so long as it remains unraised within you. And if we can experience the powerlessness and then recover from that, that is the Christ experience. And I think a lot of people are having that experience because things are so bad in the material world. And so people are sort of falling into depression or falling into a sort of nothingness. And then they have an experience where they come out of that. And they may not consciously realize that's the Christ experience, but a lot of people have this experience of nothingness or powerlessness, and then they're able to be redeemed from that. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Brian. Karsten.
Yeah, just wanted to recapitulate that I suddenly got this phrase, I think it was Jeff that used it, that we have natural seasonal cycles, and then we have spiritual seasonal cycles. And the Golgotha mystery is part of this spiritual seasonal cycle. And it's on a much larger scale. And my understanding is that materialism, the experience of nihility, the moral vacuousness that we can experience, and so on, these experiences, they are all part of this spiritual seasonal cycle, as it has been mentioned by others as well. And one thing that I have experienced is that in this process, it's not all up to you. So I know Steiner is often talking about the will and the necessity of the will, applying the will in this kind of ascension into the spiritual. But it's my experience that there's something you could call grace. And so, I mean, we can be curious about what is happening for Zizek with his materialistic Christianity. Is that a temptation? But I think if he's authentic in his approach, I think the very fact that he's preoccupied in his mind with these ideas, with the Christ event, is beneficial. And then eventually, when you're open for it, grace will kick in and give you those spiritual experiences that allow you to see that this is not just about sociology, but there's a spiritual world and there are spiritual beings in this spiritual world, and we're part of this kind of spiritual community. And so it's just, I mean, the main temptation, I think, is if we do not see the love of God in all that is happening, see that it's all a part of a process that deep down is instigated by the love of God for this world and for the creation, and so we shouldn't be afraid of materialism and this experience of nihility, because there are very powerful forces that will come to our help once we're ready to receive it.
Yeah, thank you, Karsten. Yeah, and I wanted to mention Bruce's comment as we wrap up here, that it's as if we are all speaking as though the material world were primary and that we have to understand the spiritual as a sort of on top extra thing added to the material, and how might we speak differently if we did not make that assumption? And yeah, we've somehow gotten into a strange, twisted up situation where we imagine the material world described by scientists is primary when, as Steiner's always pointing out, this rise of natural science, it's more significant because of how it has transformed the human person and our own consciousness than for what it tells us about some supposedly materialistic external world. And so if we can remember that science is a product of human persons, the human person is primary, and science is one expression of human personality. I think that recenters the spirit in each of us, as the source of our science, rather than this absurd situation that scientific materialism puts us in, where somehow, for some reason, the universe is intelligible, despite being a conglomeration of purposeless, blind forces, mechanistic operations. And somehow, despite not, being created, but just contingently evolved, we have this intelligence that allows us to detect the intelligibility, decode the intelligibility of nature. It's a very absurd situation that scientific materialism uh, claims that we're in. And so if we actually wanted to justify a scientific understanding of nature, I think we would need to root it in spiritual reality and the spiritual reality of persons. Which again, kind of harkens back to this idea that rather than the human being a product of evolution, the human being is the process of evolution, has always been evolving, and is not just recently squirted out at the end of a long, blind, dumb, mechanistic evolutionary process. All right. Well, did you have something quick, James, or is your hand still up from before?
I have something quick, just something
Please.
quick. This imaginary of the Christ Jesus on the cross, and the best thing I've heard, and this is just rooted through me now, is that when the cosmic Christ went back to the Father, when he left, when he died, that it was the etheric body and the physical body yelling out, Eli, Eli, sabachthani, why, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because this archetype of the human being, this Christ figure, has left, and now they feel forsaken. So that's another image I have for that. Thanks.
Thanks, James. All right, friends. That's it for this week. See you next week for session 8. I really enjoyed and appreciate all of your insights. So thank you. Have a good week.